mind.
Ethanol works.
The media like ethanol.
Oh.
It's cheaper and cleaner. 60 Minutes called it
I
a
forgot
solution.
about this very important part. Take some notes on these videos. We're going to have a short little quiz, and you get to use your notes on the quiz. Okay?
Could you start with 35?
Yes.
When was this aired?
I can't remember, like late 2000. They talk about Mitt Romney and stuff on here too, so it was sometime within the last 4 years.
Okay. Which is the hardest thing?
Okay, so I will go ahead and start it over. And here we go.
And finally, myth number 1. Ethanol is great. We made this myth number 1 because almost all the politicians are saying that this election season. They say we must use more ethanol to help save the environment. But is it true?
Ramp up the availability of ethanol by...
Both Democrats and Republicans. Look at the smog.
Ethanol works.
The media like ethanol. It's cheaper and cleaner. 60 Minutes called it the solution.
Ethanol makes a lot of sense.
And the presidential candidate flamed.
We've got to get serious about ethanol.
Get serious, they say, because ethanol is cleaner and renewable. It'll slow global warming and protect the environment. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John Edwards, and Mitt Romney all want the government to subsidize the development of ethanol.
The economics of ethanol make more and more sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Well, if it made a lot of sense, we wouldn't have to subsidize it or mandate its consumption.
Jerry Taylor of the Cato Institute points out that if ethanol were just better, as so many people say, they wouldn't need your tax money to subsidize it.
You can make a profit in this economy by putting something in the market. The government doesn't need to put a gun to your head.
But ethanol is worth subsidizing, say its cheerleaders.
It's made from corn. We grow corn. It's natural. Just makes it sound better.
But it turns out that it takes just about as much energy to produce ethanol as you get when you burn ethanol. It takes a lot of fossil fuels to make the fertilizer, to run the tractor, to build the silo, to get that corn to a processing plant, to run the processing plant.
And ethanol cannot be moved in pipelines the way gasoline is because ethanol degrades. So using ethanol means using many more big polluting trucks.
To move the corn from the fields to the processing plant, and then to move that corn ethanol from the Midwest to the coast. That takes a tremendous amount of energy.
So much so that a number of recent studies say making ethanol uses almost as much energy as ethanol creates.
Net energy balance is 0 more or less.
More bad news. The increased push for ethanol has led to a sharp increase in corn growing, which means much more land must be plowed. And that means much more fertilizer, much more water must be used on farms, and more pesticides. So why are politicians so in love with ethanol?
Almost every politician says this is a great thing.
It's no mystery that people who want to be president support the corn ethanol program. The first caucus is in the state of Iowa, and if you're not willing to sacrifice children to the corn god, you will not get out of the Iowa primary with more than 1% of the vote.
Hillary Clinton made 17 votes against ethanol until she started running for president.
Right now, the closest thing we have to a state religion in the United States is in Christianity. It's corn.
We are gathered here today to say amen to green fuels and ethanol.
One of many politicians saying amen is Senator Evan Bach of Indiana.
The alternative is just to continue to consume more and more oil, more and more gasoline. That's not good for America.
But you politicians make it seem like a free lunch. This would be using much more fertilizer, pesticides. This adds to greenhouse gases.
There's no panacea. There's no magic bullet. As we produce ethanol in more efficient ways, it will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we are all Peter. And you and the farmers in Indiana are Paul. That's not fair.
You're currently being robbed to pay sheiks in the Middle East. Doesn't it make more sense to have Middle Western farmers producing America's fuel?
Make our dependence on Middle Eastern oil a thing of the past.
Many ethanol proponents say even if it doesn't save energy, it'll reduce our dependence on foreign oil.
Oh, that's nonsense. There is simply no way we are going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil via ethanol.
A University of Minnesota study concluded that even turning all of America's corn into ethanol would meet only 12% of our gasoline demand.
This just helps you politicians and the people who make ethanol at everyone else's expense.
This is good for America. We have allowed our dependency on imported petroleum to grow and grow and grow. That is not healthy for our country.
That's what we hear, plus lots of other wonderful reasons why we should love ethanol. But many of those reasons reasons are myths.
It's not going to produce energy independence. It's not going to clean the air. It's going to do none of those things. All it will do is make corn farmers richer and companies like ADM who process ethanol a lot richer. It'll make every one of us who aren't in that business poor. This is a naked transfer program designed to take money from people who buy corn and to give it to people who grow corn and people who make ethanol for a living. That's all it is.
Okay. So, comments on that? What's that?
Algae biofuels all the way.
I remember those times.
What do you think about the argument of we're just giving the money to the sheiks? What do you think about that comment? Doesn't that make kind of sense? Like, buy American, why would we want to, even if it is more expensive, at least our money's going to the farmers.
I'm just gonna point it out right now. I think it's incredibly short-sighted that everyone's all like, oh, if we stop running our cars on gasoline, we're gonna stop using petroleum altogether, when that's entirely untrue. Plastic, virtually everything that we sell on the market is a petroleum-based product.
Good, that's a
Still
good point.
need the
Yeah.
petroleum.
So that's a good point, that petroleum is used, that oil is used in the production of some things outside of just fuel consumption for cars.
And honestly, most of our oil is domestic. We don't have much foreign oil.
What do you mean? I'm not sure I understand or where you're coming from there.
We get more of our oil from North American sources.
Oh, North American sources. Okay, okay, and South American probably
Yeah.
too would be my guess. But yes. Are any of you familiar with how it's worked for Canada? Canada has some fuel up there, and so they're kind of energy independent, so to speak. They end up selling most of their fuel abroad. And guess what it sells for domestically? The same price it sells for around the world. So to argue energy independence, that it's going to somehow help your country, is a myth. Because the energy market is a world market. And so even though Canada is currently in the position that the United States makes claims they might want to be, it really hasn't helped domestic prices for fuel within the country, because they're just selling it, now that they are oil rich, let's say, or whatever, fuel rich, they're just selling it to the rest of the world at the world price. They're just a player along with the Middle East and South America, with Venezuela and other places. It's all just a big world market. So the only argument that would hold water, as near as I can tell, is if we all went to World War III, and now we'd have the fuel to ourselves.
All the fuel.
Yeah, because then we'd have it if international trade ceased to exist. In other words, it's a pretty far-fetched world to believe that we'd get to that point, I think. So there's a lot of feel-good things that go on in that world that don't always come to be. So, all right. Any other questions or comments about the video? Those are good things.
Don't these discussions kind of just ignore the underlying issue, and that's levels of consumption? That we want to maintain levels of consumption or increase levels of consumption by what we produce and how we use our fuel and transportation costs, rather than looking at ways that we can decrease consumption instead of just eliminating the need for it.
I think I'm tracking with you. I mean, yes, there's an underlying, so the way to help avoid that is to reduce our consumption of it and find alternative methods of transportation, for instance, right? Or if we're riding light rail or something, or other carpooling even could dramatically do that. So yes, there might be other way, and it might, having a big propaganda campaign about ethanol, every presidential campaign, whether it's Republican, Democrat, as the video kind of showed, kind of masks other alternatives that might be available to people, right? To have kind of the focus on this particular thing. And getting back to who it favors, the chic or the Americans. They say Americans, but who really gets favored when we do that? What specific Americans are favored? The corn farmers are favored. Is that the majority of Americans? It's a very, very, very small number of Americans. So you can see how through having a silver tongue, we can all of a sudden transform what's really going on as it's good for America or Americans. It's good to a few Americans. It's good for Iowa. It's good for a few people who happen to be in the corn business. It's good. I also had a guy that I knew in real estate development, just to give you another unintended consequence. This guy, I can't remember I don't think he had a farming background. He was in the mortgage business for a while, and then he did pretty well in some real estate developments. Long story short, ethanol comes along, subsidies for ethanol. Guess what? He goes out and starts building a plant in northern Iowa. Ethanol. An ethanol plant. So he just ran where the money was. And so is that a good, let's just say that this guy's good at starting businesses. Is that a good thing for him to be chasing? You know, is that from society's standpoint, should we structure incentives such that everybody wants to be an ethanol producer all of a sudden? That doesn't sound very wise, right? Especially given the data, what we saw on some of the expenses and things. Okay, any other last comments on that one? We got another video, so keep your notes handy. Yes?
So, if farmers are getting so much money for corn, then won't they stop producing their other resources?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Now, what did we learn about what's going to happen to corn prices? What have we learned about this increase in demand on corn prices? Prices go up or down? Prices go up. Price of related outputs is what kind of Mallory is bringing up. So if all of a sudden I'm a farmer and I'm choosing between corn or soybeans, what do I pick? Corn. Supply of soybeans goes down. Price of soybeans go up. Price of feed for pigs goes up. Right? So pig farmers now have more expensive feed. Prices at the grocery store for bacon, which you guys buy, go up or down? Up. Right? So this all trickled into actually the consumer's pocket in a bad way. All things that we can kind of predict now using some of our tools with econ. All right, so here's a little Milton Friedman. Now this is an older video. That doesn't have any. There we go. Okay. So who does this guy look like?
This is, what's his face? Darn it.
The kind of activist guy. It's the young Michael Moore. You know how Michael Moore looks today? Not positive that it's him. I don't have any evidence, but if you look at his face, and he's kind of an activist type here. He's a young college student, and he's up against one of my favorite economists, Milton Friedman. And this was a video series that they did. So this video is about 5 minutes long, and let's give it a listen.
Excellent job tonight of defending capitalism. Capitalism has treated you well. In general, it's treated the people in this audience well. And as you say, people respond to things based on their self-interest, so I think they've responded well to you. What I'd like to get to now is the question of the relationship between morality and economic policy, which you talked about before in terms of the quotes from Thoreau. You said that the worst sort of person is the person who's going to try to be charitable and is going to try to be. Well, you said that it's unwise for a person to be charitable or to be sincere. What did you say then?
Let me repeat Thoreau's words. Thoreau's words were, if I knew for certain that a man was coming to my house with the conscious design of doing me good, I should run for my life. That's not the same thing as being charitable.
Okay, fine. I'll accept that distinction. Take what Thoreau just said and you've echoed and apply it to American business. And I think what you're basically saying is American business, a corporation.
Businessman.
You are the head of a corporation.
Oh, you're blaming me as the head of a corporation.
Can I ask you the question, please?
Sure.
Now, it seems to me that the implication is that that corporation should not try to do anyone else good, because then the people would run away. What they should do is pursue their own self-interest. That means profit. And what I'd like to talk about is the implications of that in terms of 3 concrete examples. I believe that a couple of years ago, when there was a major flood in Pennsylvania, you came out as opposed to aid for those disaster victims, based on the rationale that they had bought the land at lower prices because the risk was known, and they shouldn't be given any aid. I'd like people to consider the implications of that. Secondly,
That isn't what I came out against. I came out against the government providing flood insurance at low cost in advance. I did not come out against private individuals giving charity.
But what about disaster aid by the government?
I think, well, it's the same thing. The nuclear power plants ought to be required to pay for full insurance themselves, and that ought to be incorporated in their charges. I'm not in favor of government subsidization of nuclear power plant insurance.
Okay, a second.
Look, don't attribute to me your conventional views of what, quote, a conservative believes, because I'm not a conservative. I'm a believer in freedom.
Well, then I'd like to talk about that using an example, freedom. In Ohio, an old man failed to pay his electric bill. You may be familiar with the case. And the electric company turned off the electricity and he died. The reason they turned it off was because it wouldn't have been profitable for them to keep it on because he didn't pay his bill. Do you believe that was right?
I don't know the details of that case at all, but I can well believe, but I'll be glad to, no, excuse me. In many of these cases, you hear stories which when you find the details are very different from those that are presented. But let's suppose it were true. This is what I was going to go on to say. Why do you want to stop me? Why do you assume I'm always going to give the wrong answer? Let's assume the facts were true. The result is tragic. Who is responsible? Is it really the responsibility? Should I blame the people? Let's suppose that for a moment, let's suppose that the electric were to follow the practice of never turning off anybody's electricity. Let's just for a moment take that other extreme, and this was the fact. Who would pay the cost?
Are those the only two alternatives?
Well, for a moment, we can come to other alternatives, but I just want to show you the logic of it. Because I want to show you. No, it's not absurdity, because I want to show you. And what you have to ask it are the costs imposed on different individuals. The electric company is me. The electric company is a non-human institution. The electric company, what you must talk are either the stockholders of the electric company, the employees of the electric company, or the customers. Those are the people involved. Now, if you go to the other extreme and adopt the policy that the electric company will never turn anything on, then you effectively institute a system under which the only people who will pay for electricity will be those who pay for it voluntarily. Now, the number of people who will do that.
Are those the only two alternatives?
No, but I'm just showing you. I want to go. You've gone to one extreme. I'm going to the other extreme and show you that where the responsibility really lies for the kind of thing you're describing. The responsibility really lies not on the electric company for turning it off, but on those of this man's neighbors and friends and associates who are not charitable enough to enable him as an individual to meet the electric bill. You're blaming the wrong person for what happened.
Okay. Well, I think people understand that example. I have just one more.
Okay. So, what about the old man example? What do you think? Does the company have a responsibility to not shut off the power?
We have some policies in place that guard against, in times of extreme weather or certain other conditions, that power would not be turned off to avoid that kind of.
Yes. Yep. There are rules in place that, at least up in Iowa, I don't know what it's probably similar in Kansas, but because I was a landlord up in Iowa, still have some properties now, but if the temperature is below 50, no, it's smaller than that. I think it's 40 degrees, might be 50, then the power can't be turned off. Now that's also to protect the landlord too in that case, because if power shut off, the tenant bolts, then the pipes freeze. And that, I've had frozen pipes, it's not good. That can be thousands of dollars. In fact, I had one place, not to get on too big of a tangent, that had a swimming pool in the basement because it was a radiator house, and the pipes froze, the tenant busted, and it turned out it had probably been running for 2 weeks. And so when I went there was 4 feet of water in the basement. It was literally a swimming pool. And then all the floors were soaked and everything else. So that was my word. Luckily, insurance, my policy did cover it. I wasn't sure if it was going to cover it, but that one turned into like $18,000 worth of damage. But
So you built a swimming pool in the basement?
yeah, it could just take a lemon and make lemonade type of thing, right? All right, so what do you think? Do these companies have responsibility? What was Milton's argument that it shouldn't fall on the company? What was the issue he was bringing up?
Because the company is people too.
Okay, the company has people too, good. What else?
Electricity isn't free. If you can't just say, well, I'm going to be really gracious here and not turn off the power, because that money has to go somewhere. So if something that someone else gains without paying for it, someone else has to pay for it.
All right, so if we think longer term, go ahead, Rachel.
That money comes from somewhere. The electric companies kept on power for everyone in like the old man situation, and that's coming out of people's salaries.
That money's coming from somewhere, yes. Yep. And ultimately, is that a policy that would allow the electric company to continue indefinitely?
No.
Or might it actually put them out of business?
It will.
Might put them out of business, right? So if we think about the benefits that we all get from having to get to pay our bill and get our electricity and not have to cover free riders is kind of what that concept would be, the free rider concept. If people don't have to pay their bill, then they will tend to not pay their bill, and the people who do pay their bill sees their costs go up, right? So it's from a long-term perspective. So our knee-jerk reaction is a lot of times to say, oh, we got to help the old man, that bad old company shutting it off, look at what they did, they caused this harm. But as we start to think through the logic again of how society would work if we allowed that behavior to go on, hopefully we can kind of rationalize that, yeah, that doesn't make sense. There should be other institutions, is what Friedman was saying, other institutions to help the old man. Not the company, but is there other institutions, which may be a government institution, to say, hey, if you're in trouble, come to the city hall, fill out a form, emergency assistance form, which there is, that type of help for emergency assistance. Go to a church, go to a charity, go to the United Way, go somewhere or whatever, and get some short-term assistance if it's truly an emergency.
Was that what he was saying, though? I thought really what he was getting at was more about personal responsibility, that the firm or any other organization or entity or institution is made up of people, and so we shouldn't, look
Yes.
at that in personal view, that we really need to personally take responsibility and remain involved, and that all players have some
Absolutely, and so he is big on individual freedoms. Basically, the proper unit of measurement, if you will, is the individual. That as soon as we start talking about the public interest, there is no such thing as the public interest. There's only the interest of individuals. Each individual collectively makes up, we all act together, and so that's where we get this perception that there's a public interest, but really it's just the accumulation of a number of self-interests that really can't be added together with those utility functions like we did. Remember when we talked about, I can't take Casey's utility and add it to Dylan's utility. It doesn't make sense, right? They each internally have their own little happiness meter, but it doesn't make sense to add happiness together. What you get is something that doesn't make any sense. We can't have these interpersonal comparisons, leaving us with the proper unit of measurement as the individual. And to preserve individual freedoms, that's what he said. I'm not conservative, I'm not Republican, I'm not Democrat, I believe in freedom. That's kind of his angle that he's coming at. All right, one more video. Anything else? Last comments while I get this queued up. This is a continuation of this video. This is part 2. How many of you are familiar with the Ford Pinto? A few of you have had me for management class. You may have seen this. Have you heard of a Ford Pinto? So this isn't so different from today's version of what happened with the Toyota Prius. Basically, there was something that was dangerous with the Ford Pinto. It turned out to be a gas tank, and they'll go through it in the video a little bit. But there was rear end accidents, and it turned out it was a $13 piece that would make it more safe. And so it kind of discusses maybe the proper course of action of how to resolve this problem.
This has to do with the Ford Pinto. I'm not sure if you're aware of recent revelations that have come out about the production of that car. Ford produced it knowing full well that in any rear-end collision, the gas tank would blow up because they had failed to install a $13 plastic block in front of the gas tank. And Ford estimated in an internal memo that that would cost about 200 lives a year. They estimated further that the cost of each life would be $200,000. They multiplied it, and they found that the cost of installing those blocks in each of the cars would be more than the cost of saving those 200 lives. And over the past 7 years, the cars have been produced, and over 1,000 lives have been lost. It seems to me that Ford did what would be the right thing according to your policy, and yet that seems to me to be very wrong.
Well, let me ask you, let's suppose it would have cost $1 billion situation. Should Ford have put a million on the ledge? But you're really only, you know that you're really only arguing about price. You're not arguing about principle. No. Because you cannot, nobody can take the principle. Nobody can accept the principle that an infinite value should be put on the individual money. Because in order to get the money involved, in order to get the resources involved, it's not money. In order to get the resources, they have to come from somewhere. And you want the policy which maximizes the situation overall. You cannot accept the situation that 1 million people should starve in order to provide one person with a car that is completely safe.
That's absolutely right.
Right. And therefore, you're not arguing anything about principle. You're just arguing whether Ford used $200,000 was the right number or not.
No, I'm not arguing.
Suppose it was $200 million.
No.
Suppose it was $200 million. What should Ford have done?
$200 million for what?
Suppose it would have cost $200 million per life saved. Should Ford still have spent that $200 million?
You mean per? That's not really the question.
Yes, it is a question.
Yes,
that's the principle of the question. That's the only principle involved. I don't know whether Ford did the right thing, the right answer or not. That's the question of whether these numbers are valid numbers for the relative cost of different things. You're not arguing about principle if you once agree with it. That if it's been $200 million, the cost per life saved is $200 million. You would not argue. Look, let me go back for a moment.
Can I say something in response to that? If Ford had not been able to market those cars in the same kind of economic bracket because of the price of installing this one plastic block, that would be a different question. Maybe Ford could have considered redesigning the whole car so as to make it cheaper. But what we're talking about is balancing advantages and balancing principles. Just a minute. I'm a supporter of abortion. Therefore, I don't believe that every single human life is sacred. I believe the principles have to be balanced. And yet, I don't see Ford spending $13 less on each car at the cost of 200 lives a year as being a principled position to take. And yet, I think your life requires
one fewer life. So that the $13 per car, so that one life, instead of being 200 times, what's 200 times? 200,000 is 40 million. Suppose there had been one life a year, so it cost 40 million. Would then okay for not
you can't predict that one life is going to be cost because of a physical defect in the car. This was a clear
I know, but this is you're evading the question of principle.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that they knew before they put the car out that there was a mechanical defect.
You know when you buy a car, you know that your chance of being killed in a Pinto is greater than your chance of being killed in a Mack truck.
No, I didn't. I didn't know that the gas tank would rupture.
Of course it is a question. Every one of us separately in this room could, at a cost, reduce his risk of dying tomorrow. You don't have to walk across the street. Of course. The question is he willing to pay for it? And the question here he should be raising, if he wants to raise a question of principle, the principle he should raise is whether Ford wasn't required to attach the of this car in the state. We have made this car $13 cheaper, and therefore it is whatever the percentage is, it is 1% more risky for you to buy.
But why?
Now then you would be arguing a real question of principle.
Why should they do that? Doesn't that interfere with the free enterprise system that you're talking about? Why not?
The consumer should be free to buy what he wants to do. If you want to pay $13 extra for that, you should be free to do it. If you don't want to pay $13, excuse me, we have to use it for the argument.
So then the government does have the right to require information in corporations, is that right?
No, the government has the right to provide parts of law in which corporations will deliberately conceal material that is relevant to be used for fraud and may pay very heavy expenses. And that is a desirable part of the market, of course. What I'm trying to say to you is that these things are really a little bit more subtle and sophisticated than you are at first. You can't get easy answers along this line, because your way of putting it really only doesn't really get at the fundamental principles. The real fundamental principle is that people individually should be free to decide how much they're willing to pay for reducing the chances of their death. Now, people mostly aren't willing to pay very much. I personally regard this as very, very illogical. I see people on all sides of me smoking. Well, there's no doubt, nobody denies that increases their chance of death. I'm not saying they shouldn't be free to smoke, don't misunderstand me. I just think they're fools to do it. And I know they're fools because I quit on the basis of the evidence 18 years ago. But that's the real issue. And if you want it to be rated for it, you ought to be rated on those terms, not on the ground that you don't think they use the right number. Now look, I don't think we can keep on going very much. I'm afraid we're going to run out of tape, and I'm afraid I'm going to run out of voice. So I think I'll call it down.
All right, so what was Friedman's point there on the Pinto deal? Where did Ford go wrong? Did they go wrong in not putting it in for $13 a pop? Or does he give them no blame at all?
Blame or not for concealing the fact that it would explode their customer.
Good. So why was that? So he would say Ford was to blame for that. And why is that important? So that it wasn't so much that they didn't pay to have the $13 thing. That was less important than concealing it. Why? What was his main reason? That was actually the important thing that Ford did wrong.
They were buying it at a discount thinking that that safety measure was put in, so we were paying for something that wasn't there.
Okay. So we should be left with the choice to risk our own lives, right? And so if our probability of dying was increased by 0.00001% or whatever the probability was that the gas tank would blow, then we can take that as long as we know that it's got a chance of blowing. Then we either choose, we're free to choose whether to buy it or not buy it. So then it takes the price out of the question. Do you have Stretch or question? Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
I want to comment. I know that Ford is in it, for monetary, profit,
Yep.
and that's their goals. But it's kind of hard to imagine, them sitting in like their little conference room talking about the cost of lives versus the cost of installing the safety thing.
But really that type of thing is done all the time. I mean, we all take risk, and there's risk of products, and they need to disclose it. How about the disclosures we get on drug pharmaceuticals? Well, you might want to be careful before you take this because it may cause bleeding and internal things and blah, 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 right? And we hear the little ramble on. So you choose whether you want to buy it. Here's the risk associated with it. All right, here's your quiz. Pull out a fresh sheet of paper. Got some short questions for you.
And our video notes too.
Make sure your name, you can use your notes, but fresh sheet of paper for the quiz. Should be fairly short answers. There's a few that might take a little bit of explanation down here maybe, but nothing too taxing, hopefully. Can't read my handwriting, just raise your hand and I'll